Hello guys, Dr. Spooks here. If you enjoy my videos, please click the like button. It's the only way YouTube's algorithm really notices me. I would be very grateful to you. Emma leaned out of the car window, inhaling the crisp mountain air as their SUV bumped along the winding dirt road. The cabin appeared ahead, nestled among towering pines. Its weathered wooden exterior and stone chimney gave it a rustic charm. "This is perfect," Emma said, her voice tinged with excitement. "No emails, no traffic, just us and nature." Jack chuckled, gripping the steering wheel tightly as the road narrowed. "And no neighbors. Isolation included, free of charge." They parked and unloaded their bags, the forest's tranquility broken only by chirping birds and the occasional rustle of leaves. The cabin's interior was cozy, with a stone fireplace, a small kitchenette, and a plush couch facing a window overlooking the woods. Emma explored the rooms while Jack carried in their gear. "This place is straight out of a brochure," Emma said, setting a lantern on the coffee table. She pulled a pair of hiking boots from her bag. "Let's check out the trails before we lose daylight." Jack grabbed his rifle and slung it over his shoulder. He never went into the wilderness unarmed, even during a vacation. "Just in case," he said when Emma shot him a questioning look. The couple set off, following a narrow path that wound through dense foliage. The air was cooler under the canopy, and the silence seemed heavier the farther they walked. They reached a ridge with a view of the valley below, taking in the breathtaking sight of rolling hills bathed in golden light. "This was such a good idea," Emma said, snapping a photo. "We should make this an annual thing." Jack smiled, but then tilted his head. "Do you hear that?" Emma paused, listening. A faint hum, barely audible, seemed to emanate from the woods. It was rhythmic, almost mechanical, and sent a shiver down her spine. "What is that?" "Could be a power line or something," Jack offered, though he didn't sound convinced. They lingered a moment before heading back, the hum fading into the background. By the time they returned to the cabin, the sun was dipping below the horizon, casting long shadows across the yard. Jack lit a fire while Emma prepared dinner. They ate in comfortable silence, the crackle of flames filling the room. As they settled in for the night, Emma noticed the quiet. No distant hum, no wildlife, nothing. She pushed the thought aside, attributing it to the isolation. But as they climbed into bed, an unease settled over her. The woods outside felt vast, unknowable, and for the first time she wondered if being so far from civilization was really the dream escape they'd imagined. The morning light filtered through the cabin's windows, casting warm rays on the wooden floor. Emma stretched and yawned, the unease of the previous night pushed to the back of her mind. She and Jack spent the morning drinking coffee on the porch, watching the sunlight dance through the trees. After breakfast, Emma decided to tidy up the cabin. As she moved the couch to sweep behind it, she noticed something wedged between the back of the couch and the wall. It was a small leather-bound journal, its edges worn and stained. Curious, she sat on the couch and began flipping through its pages. "What's that?" Jack asked, walking in from the porch with his rifle in hand. "A journal," Emma replied. "Looks like someone left it here." The handwriting was messy but legible, and the entries started off mundane, notes about the weather, meals, and hikes. But as she read further, the tone shifted. The writer mentioned hearing strange noises at night. Footsteps on the roof, faint tapping on the windows, and an eerie hum that seemed to come from the forest. Emma felt a chill creep up her spine as she read aloud. "We thought it was animals at first, but the noises keep getting closer. Last night there was knocking on the door. When we opened it, no one was there." Jack leaned over her shoulder, his brow furrowed. "That's creepy." Emma flipped to the final entry. The words were hurried, almost frantic. "The lights are back. They're brighter now and closer. We saw something in the woods today. Tall, gray, not human. They're watching us. We're leaving tomorrow, but I'm not sure we'll make it." The entry ended abruptly, with no signature. Emma stared at the page, her heart pounding. "Do you think this is real, or just someone messing around?" Jack shook his head, a frown etched on his face. "I don't know, but it's weird they left this here." The unease from the previous night returned, gnawing at Emma. She placed the journal on the coffee table, but its presence seemed to fill the room with an oppressive weight. That afternoon, they decided to hike a shorter trail closer to the cabin. The forest felt different, darker, more oppressive. The usual sounds of birds and insects were absent, replaced by an eerie stillness. Emma kept glancing over her shoulder, her imagination running wild. As they reached a clearing, Jack froze. "Do you see that?" he whispered. Emma followed his gaze and saw a strange mark etched into a tree trunk. It was a perfect circle, surrounded by jagged lines radiating outward. The mark looked fresh, as if it had been burned into the bark. "Let's go back," Emma said, her voice trembling. Jack nodded, gripping his rifle tightly. As they made their way back to the cabin, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Shadows seemed to shift in her peripheral vision, but when she turned to look, nothing was there. By the time they reached the cabin, the sun was setting, and the oppressive silence of the woods followed them inside. The fire crackled in the hearth as Emma and Jack sat silently on the couch, the leather-bound journal lying untouched on the coffee table. The unease in the air was palpable. Emma sipped her tea, her eyes darting to the windows every few moments. "We're letting this journal mess with our heads," Jack finally said, breaking the silence. He leaned forward, picking it up. "It's just a story. People write all kinds of weird stuff for kicks." Emma wasn't so sure, but she didn't argue. She wanted to believe him, to dismiss the unease as nothing more than paranoia. That night, they climbed into bed early, hoping sleep would ease their growing anxiety. The cabin was silent, save for the occasional pop of the dying fire. Emma drifted off quickly, but Jack lay awake, staring at the ceiling. His fingers rested on the revolver tucked under his pillow, a precaution he now found himself thankful for. A faint sound stirred him from his thoughts. He held his breath, listening. It came again, a soft, deliberate scraping noise like something brushing against the cabin walls. Jack sat up, straining to hear more. The sound moved, circling the cabin. "Emma," he whispered, shaking her awake. She groaned softly. "What is it?" "Listen." The sound stopped. They sat in silence for a long moment, the stillness more unnerving than the noise. Jack rose and grabbed his rifle. "Stay here," he said firmly, though Emma was already climbing out of bed. "Like hell I'm staying here alone," she said, grabbing a flashlight. Jack frowned but didn't argue. Together they stepped into the main room. The fire had died down, casting long shadows across the walls. Jack moved to the window and peered out. The flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the yard. Nothing. "It's probably an animal," Jack muttered, though the tightness in his voice betrayed him. Emma flinched as something thudded overhead. Jack swung the rifle toward the ceiling, his jaw tightening. The noise came again, heavier this time, like footsteps moving across the roof. "Animals don't walk like that," Emma whispered. Jack motioned for her to stay back as he moved toward the door. He eased it open, rifle at the ready, and stepped onto the porch. The flashlight beam swept over the roof, the trees, the yard. The woods loomed silently, their darkness impenetrable. Nothing. Jack exhaled slowly, lowering the rifle. "It's clear." But as they turned to go back inside, Emma froze. "Jack, look." She pointed to the tree line. Two small lights hovered in the darkness, perfectly round and unnervingly still. They weren't stars nor reflections. They almost seemed like eyes. Jack raised the rifle again, his hand steady. "Get inside," he said quietly. Emma didn't argue this time. She backed into the cabin, locking the door behind her. Jack remained on the porch, staring into the woods. The lights blinked out, leaving only darkness. When Jack finally came back inside, his face was pale. "We're keeping the lights on tonight." Neither of them slept. The next morning dawned gray and overcast. The light diffused through thick clouds. Jack and Emma sat at the small kitchen table, their breakfast untouched. The events of the previous night hung heavily in the air. "Maybe we should leave," Emma said, breaking the silence. Her voice was low, hesitant. Jack shook his head. "It's just a couple of weird nights. We're probably scaring ourselves over nothing. Let's go for a hike, clear our heads." Emma didn't argue, though unease settled in her stomach. They packed lightly. Jack carried his rifle and revolver, while Emma grabbed the flashlight and a water bottle. The trail they chose led deeper into the woods, a narrow path lined with towering trees. The dense canopy muted the sounds of the forest, creating an eerie quiet. They walked in silence, both lost in their thoughts. Emma couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. She glanced over her shoulder more than once, but the trail behind them was empty. Jack remained alert, his grip on the rifle firm. After an hour, they reached a clearing with a small stream running through it. The sound of water was a welcome reprieve from the oppressive silence. Emma knelt to fill her bottle while Jack scanned the surrounding trees. "Do you see that?" Jack's voice was barely above a whisper. Emma looked up sharply. "What?" Jack pointed to a spot just beyond the clearing. At first, Emma saw nothing but shadows. Then something moved, a quick fluid motion that disappeared as quickly as it came. "It's probably a deer," she said, though her voice wavered. "That wasn't a deer." Jack's tone was firm. He raised the rifle, peering through the scope. "Stay here." "Jack, don't—" But he was already moving toward the trees. Emma stood frozen, watching as he disappeared into the shadows. The minutes stretched on, each one more agonizing than the last. Finally, Jack returned, his face grim. "There's nothing there," he said, though he didn't sound convinced. "Let's head back." As they made their way back to the cabin, the forest seemed to close in around them. The shadows deepened, and the silence grew heavier. Emma's heart raced with every step. Halfway back, they heard it, a low, rhythmic hum, faint but unmistakable. It seemed to vibrate through the air, coming from all around them. Emma froze, her eyes wide. "Jack," she whispered. "I hear it," he said, scanning the trees. His voice was calm, but his grip on the rifle tightened. The hum grew louder, more oppressive. Emma thought she saw movement in the corner of her eye, something tall and thin slipping between the trees. She grabbed Jack's arm, her nails digging into his sleeve. "Run," Jack said sharply, pulling her along. They broke into a sprint, the hum following them like a predator stalking its prey. Emma's chest burned, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She didn't dare look back. When they finally burst out of the woods and into the clearing around the cabin, the hum stopped. The silence was deafening. Emma collapsed onto the porch steps, her legs trembling. Jack scanned the tree line, his rifle raised. "Get inside," he said, his voice tight. Emma didn't need to be told twice. The cabin felt smaller now, its cozy charm replaced by an oppressive sense of confinement. Emma paced the living room, glancing toward the windows every few moments. Jack sat at the table, his rifle resting across his lap, his revolver holstered at his side. His eyes were fixed on the tree line visible through the front window. "This isn't paranoia anymore," Emma said, her voice cracking. "Something's out there, Jack." Jack nodded grimly. "I know, but we're safer here than out in those woods right now. We'll leave first thing in the morning." Emma bit her lip, staring at the leather-bound journal still sitting on the coffee table. She hadn't touched it since the night before, but it seemed to radiate a sinister energy. She wondered if the previous tenants had felt the same helplessness, the same fear. As darkness fell, the hum returned, faint at first but growing louder. Emma's stomach twisted into knots as the sound reverberated through the cabin. She looked at Jack, who had already risen to his feet, rifle in hand. "Stay away from the windows," he instructed, his voice steady but tense. The hum wasn't alone this time. A soft tapping began, coming from the back of the cabin. It was rhythmic and deliberate, as though something or someone was testing the walls. Emma's breathing quickened. Jack moved to the rear window, his movements slow and deliberate. He peeked through the curtain, his expression hardening. Nothing. The tapping stopped, replaced by a loud thud on the roof. Emma jumped, clutching the flashlight in her trembling hands. "It's on the roof," she whispered. Jack moved toward the door. "Stay here," he said, unlocking the deadbolt. "Are you insane?" Emma hissed. "Don't go out there." Jack didn't respond. He stepped onto the porch, his flashlight slicing through the darkness as he aimed his rifle at the roof. Emma held her breath, her ears straining for any sound. The silence was broken by a loud crash from the side of the cabin. Jack spun toward the noise, his flashlight catching a fleeting glimpse of movement. Tall, thin, and impossibly fast. He fired a shot, the sound echoing through the forest. Emma screamed, her hands flying to her ears. "Get inside!" Jack shouted, backing toward the door. He slammed the door shut behind him, bolting it with shaking hands. "I saw it," he said, his voice low and strained. "It's not human." Emma's knees gave out, and she sank onto the couch. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of what Jack had seen. What do we do? We wait, Jack said, gripping his rifle tightly. They want us scared. I'm not giving them that satisfaction. The hum intensified, and the lights in the cabin flickered. Emma clutched the flashlight like a lifeline. The walls of the cabin felt thinner now, as though they wouldn't hold against whatever was out there. Through the window, Emma thought she saw shadows moving between the trees, circling closer. She didn't want to believe it, but deep down she knew the truth. They weren't alone. The hum vibrated through the walls, relentless and unyielding. Jack and Emma sat huddled in the living room, their backs to the fireplace. Jack's rifle was aimed at the door, his finger resting lightly on the trigger. Then the lights went out. Emma stifled a scream as darkness swallowed the cabin. Jack turned on his flashlight, its beam cutting through the shadows. "Stay close," he whispered. The hum seemed to shift, growing deeper, more resonant. The air itself felt heavier. Emma's chest tightened and she struggled to breathe. Then she saw them. Through the window, pale figures emerged from the tree line. They moved with an eerie, gliding motion, their tall, thin frames unnaturally still despite the uneven ground. Their skin was a sickly gray, smooth and reflective under the moonlight. Their heads were bulbous, with large obsidian black eyes that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. "Jack?" Emma's voice was barely audible. "I see them," he said, his voice steady but low. He adjusted his grip on the rifle, his eyes never leaving the window. The Greys stopped at the edge of the yard, their heads tilting in unison. They stood perfectly still, watching. The hum intensified, and Emma felt a pressure in her skull, like a rising headache. Her pulse thundered in her ears. One of the Greys raised a spindly arm pointing toward the cabin. The others began to move, gliding closer with an unnatural grace. "They're coming," Emma said, panic lacing her words. Jack stood, his movements calm and deliberate. He raised the rifle, aiming through the window. "Stay down." Emma dropped to the floor, her hands over her ears as the hum became almost deafening. She watched as Jack fired, the crack of the rifle shattering the oppressive noise. The recoil barely fazed him. Through the window, one of the Greys staggered, a dark smear spreading across its torso. It didn't fall or cry out, just stood there staring. Then it tilted its head as if curious. "They don't go down easy," Jack muttered, firing again. The second shot hit the same Grey, and this time it collapsed to the ground. The others didn't flinch or react. They simply continued their approach. "They're testing us," Jack said, stepping back from the window. He grabbed Emma's arm and pulled her to her feet. "We need to fortify the doors and windows, now." Emma scrambled to push the couch against the front door while Jack reinforced the rear. The pounding in her head was relentless, the hum vibrating through every fiber of her being. She thought she heard faint whispers, but she shoved the thought aside. She wouldn't let her mind betray her. Jack returned to her side, his face pale but resolute. "They're not breaking in tonight," he said, though his voice betrayed a flicker of doubt. Emma wasn't so sure. As the Greys gathered outside, their lifeless black eyes fixed on the cabin, she had the sinking realization that this was only the beginning. The night grew colder, the temperature inside the cabin dropping unnaturally fast. Emma huddled under a blanket, trembling, though not entirely from the cold. Jack paced the room, his rifle gripped tightly, his eyes darting to the windows. Outside, the Greys had fully surrounded the cabin. Their tall, thin silhouettes stood motionless against the backdrop of the dark forest, their black eyes reflecting the faint moonlight. They didn't make a sound. The only noise was the relentless hum, vibrating through the air and rattling Emma's nerves. "They're waiting," Jack muttered, glancing at Emma. "For what? I don't know." Emma shook her head, her voice trembling. "They don't need to wait. They could break in any time they want." Jack stopped and turned to her, his expression hard. "If they try, I'll stop them." Before Emma could respond, a loud bang echoed through the cabin. It wasn't the door or windows. It came from the roof, the sound of something heavy walking above them. Slow, deliberate footsteps creaked against the wooden shingles, moving toward the edge of the cabin. "They're testing us," Jack said, his jaw tightening. He raised the rifle, aiming it at the ceiling as though he could see through it. "They want to see how we'll react." Emma clutched the flashlight, her knuckles white. "What do we do?" "We don't panic," Jack said. "That's what they want. We stay inside, keep them guessing." The footsteps stopped, replaced by a loud thud. then another. The noise moved around the cabin, shifting from the roof to the walls, like something dragging its limbs along the exterior. Suddenly, a loud knock echoed from the front door. Emma jumped, dropping the flashlight. The beam rolled across the floor, illuminating the doorway. Jack aimed the rifle at the door, his finger hovering over the trigger. "Don't move," he whispered. The knock came again, harder this time, as if whatever was outside wanted to make its presence known. Then the doorknob rattled, slow and deliberate, as though it was testing the lock. Emma's breathing quickened. "It's trying to get in." Jack didn't respond. His focus remained on the door, his body tense. Another knock, louder than before, then silence. The hum outside grew louder, filling the room like a pressure cooker about to explode. Jack glanced at the windows, then at Emma. "They're trying to make us crack," he said. "We can't give them that." But before he could say more, the back door rattled violently. Jack turned, raising the rifle as the sound intensified. Something slammed against the door, the wood groaning under the force. "Move the table," Jack barked, and Emma scrambled to push the heavy wooden table against the door. Jack joined her, shoving it into place as the pounding continued. The grays outside didn't relent. Shadows darted past the windows, their movements fast and unnatural. Emma felt the walls closing in, the oppressive noise and pressure making it hard to think. "They're going to get in," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Jack gritted his teeth. "Not tonight." The pounding stopped abruptly, leaving only the hum. Emma looked at Jack, her heart pounding. "Why did they stop?" Jack didn't answer. He was staring at the window where a pair of black eyes peered in, unblinking. The black eyes at the window were paralyzing, like staring into an endless void. Emma's breath hitched, her body frozen in place. Jack reacted first, raising his rifle and firing. The glass shattered, and the figure outside vanished into the darkness. "Emma, focus!" Jack yelled, snapping her out of her daze. He grabbed her arm, pulling her away from the window. "We can't stay here. They're just playing with us now." Emma nodded, her voice trembling. "How do we get out? They're everywhere." Jack paced the room, his mind racing. "We wait until first light. They seem to move slower in the daylight. When the sun comes up, we make a run for the truck." Emma glanced at the shattered window. The hum had grown quieter, but she could still feel its oppressive weight in the air. "What if they don't let us make it to morning?" Jack's jaw tightened. "Then we fight." He began moving through the cabin, securing what he could. Furniture was pushed against doors and windows, makeshift barricades meant to slow the grays down. Emma followed him, her hands trembling as she helped stack chairs and reinforce the table against the back door. "I don't understand what they want," Emma said, her voice cracking. "Why us? Why this cabin?" Jack paused, looking at her. "It's not about us. They were here before we were. The journal, the people who wrote it, they didn't make it out. But we will." The determination in his voice steadied Emma, if only a little. She watched as Jack checked his revolver, ensuring it was loaded. "I'll go first in the morning," he said. "You stay behind me, keep low. If I tell you to run, you run. Don't look back." Emma nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "What if we don't make it?" Jack placed a hand on her shoulder, his grip firm. "We will." The hours dragged on, each one heavier than the last. The grays continued their game, tapping on the walls, rattling the doors, and circling the cabin. Every so often Emma caught glimpses of their tall, thin frames through the cracks in the barricades. They didn't seem to need to breathe or blink, and their movements were so fluid they seemed almost like projections. As the first hints of dawn broke over the horizon, the hum outside began to fade. Jack noticed the change immediately. "This is our chance," he said. "We move now." Emma grabbed the flashlight and a small backpack with essentials, though she doubted they'd need anything but speed. Jack held the rifle at the ready, his revolver holstered but within easy reach. "Stay close," he whispered, unblocking the front door. He eased it open, the cool morning air rushing in. The woods were eerily still, the grays nowhere in sight. Emma felt a flicker of hope, but it was short-lived. As they stepped onto the porch, the humming returned. Low, almost imperceptible, but growing. "They know," Jack muttered. "Go, now." He stepped off the porch, rifle raised, leading the way toward the truck parked 50 yards away. Emma followed, her heart hammering in her chest. Shadows moved in the trees, and she knew the Greys were watching. Then, just as they reached the halfway point, the Greys stepped out of the woods. The Greys moved with an unnatural grace, gliding silently from the tree line. There were at least a dozen of them, their tall, thin bodies silhouetted against the dim light of dawn. Their black eyes seemed to pierce through Jack and Emma, unblinking and emotionless. "Keep moving!" Jack barked, raising his rifle. He fired at the nearest Grey, the shot ringing out like a thunderclap. The creature staggered but didn't fall. It tilted its head as though studying the impact before stepping forward again. Emma froze, her legs refusing to move. "Jack, they're everywhere." Jack grabbed her arm, pulling her forward. "We don't stop. The truck is our only chance." Another Grey moved to block their path. Jack aimed and fired again, hitting it square in the chest. This time it crumpled to the ground, its limbs folding awkwardly. The others didn't react, their focus unwavering. The hum grew louder, pressing against Emma's skull like a vice. Her vision blurred and she stumbled. Jack caught her, his voice sharp. "Emma, stay with me, focus." She nodded, forcing her legs to move. The truck was just ahead, its metallic surface reflecting the faint morning light. Jack fired again, forcing the Greys to scatter momentarily, creating an opening. They ran, the hum vibrating through their bodies, making every step feel heavier. As they reached the truck, Jack threw open the driver's door and shoved Emma inside. "Lock the doors," he ordered, circling to the passenger side. He fired another shot, hitting a Grey that had darted too close. Jack jumped into the driver's seat, slamming the door shut. He fumbled for the keys, his hands shaking. The Greys were closing in, their movements faster now. One reached the truck, its spindly fingers clawing at the window. Emma screamed, shrinking back. Jack turned the key, and the engine roared to life. "Hold on," he yelled, slamming the truck into reverse. The tires spun on the dirt, kicking up a cloud of dust as the truck lurched backward. The Greys didn't flinch, their black eyes fixed on the vehicle. One climbed onto the hood, its elongated fingers tapping against the windshield. Jack swerved sharply, sending the creature tumbling off. He shifted into drive, the truck barreling down the narrow dirt road. "They're following us," Emma cried, glancing out the rear window. Shadows moved among the trees, keeping pace with the truck. The hum followed, an unrelenting reminder that they weren't safe. Jack pressed the accelerator, the truck bouncing over the uneven road. "We'll lose them," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. The Greys began appearing in front of them, stepping onto the road. Jack didn't hesitate, driving straight at them. They scattered, their movements unnervingly quick. The truck's tires skidded on the loose gravel, but Jack kept control, his grip white-knuckled on the wheel. Emma clutched her seat, her heart racing. The hum grew fainter as the truck roared onto the main road, leaving the forest behind. Emma dared to hope they were safe, but as she glanced at her arm, her stomach dropped. A faint, circular burn had appeared on her skin. The hum was gone. The silence that replaced it was suffocating in its own way, broken only by the rumble of the truck's engine. Jack kept his eyes on the road, his hands gripping the wheel tightly. Emma sat beside him, staring at the faint, circular burn on her arm. It was no larger than a quarter, its edges unnaturally precise. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Jack glanced at her arm, his jaw tightening. "I don't know, but it wasn't there before." Emma's breath quickened, panic rising. "It's like the journal said, we're marked. What does that mean? What happens now?" Jack shook his head, his voice calm but strained. "We keep moving. Whatever this is, we'll figure it out. But first we put as much distance as we can between us and that cabin." Emma nodded, though the weight of the situation pressed heavily on her. She turned to look out the window, watching as the dense forest gave way to open fields and eventually small towns. The world outside felt normal, untouched by the horrors they had just escaped. But Emma couldn't shake the feeling that they hadn't truly left the Greys behind. Hours later, they pulled into the parking lot of a motel on the outskirts of a small town. Jack parked the truck and leaned back in his seat, exhaling deeply. "We'll rest here for the night, figure out our next steps in the morning." Emma nodded silently, her eyes fixed on the burn mark. She followed Jack into the motel, the fluorescent lights of the lobby feeling almost alien after the oppressive darkness of the woods. They checked in and made their way to their room. the door closing with a heavy thud that seemed to echo too long. Inside, Jack double-checked the locks while Emma sat on the edge of the bed, staring blankly at the wall. "Do you think they'll come after us again?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack set his rifle and revolver on the nightstand, his movements slow and deliberate. "I don't know, but we'll be ready if they do." Emma nodded, though she felt anything but ready. She rubbed the burn on her arm absent-mindedly, the skin tender and warm to the touch. "Why us?" she murmured. "What do they want?" Jack didn't have an answer. He sat beside her, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Whatever it is, we'll face it together." That night, Emma dreamed of black eyes staring at her from the shadows, their presence as inescapable as the mark on her arm. She woke in a cold sweat, the hum from the woods still ringing faintly in her ears. As she sat up trying to calm her racing heart, her eyes fell on the mirror across the room. For a moment she thought she saw something, tall, thin, and gray, standing just behind her, but when she turned, the room was empty. Jack stirred beside her, muttering in his sleep. Emma touched her arm, feeling the burn again, and knew deep down that they hadn't escaped. The grays had marked them, and whatever they wanted wasn't finished. In the shadows beyond the motel window, a pair of black, unblinking eyes watched, silent, patient, waiting. I've always been fascinated by urban legends and creepy stories, but nothing could prepare me for the night that changed everything. It all started innocently enough. My friend Tom and I were hanging out in his basement, browsing the internet and looking for something to kill time. Somehow we stumbled upon a thread about haunted places in our city. Most of it was the usual nonsense, but one post caught our attention. An old mansion on the outskirts of town, rumored to be haunted. According to the post, this mansion was built in the early 1800s and had a tragic history. The family who lived there disappeared under mysterious circumstances, and the house had been abandoned ever since. Local legends said it was haunted by the spirits of the family, particularly an old lady who could be seen wandering the halls at night. The post warned against exploring it, especially at night. Naturally, Tom and I saw this as a challenge. We were skeptics at heart and couldn't resist the opportunity to debunk another ghost story. We decided to go check it out on Friday night. Tom had just gotten his driver's license, so he was eager to take any excuse to drive. Friday night came quickly. As we drove towards the mansion, I could feel the excitement and adrenaline building. The closer we got, the more isolated the surroundings became. Tall trees lined the narrow road, their branches creating eerie shadows under the moonlight. We finally arrived at the mansion just after 11 p.m. The place was even more imposing in person. It was a massive, decrepit building that looked like it hadn't been touched in over a century. The windows were broken, the paint was peeling, and the whole place had an aura of decay. We parked the car a little way down the road, not wanting to attract any attention. Armed with flashlights and our phones, we made our way to the front door. The door creaked loudly as we pushed it open, the sound echoing through the empty halls. The inside of the mansion was just as run down as the outside. Dust covered everything, and cobwebs hung in every corner. Despite the decrepitude, you could tell this place had once been grand. The rooms were spacious, with high ceilings and ornate moldings. It was easy to imagine how majestic it must have been in its heyday. We began our exploration cautiously, staying close together at first. We moved from room to room, finding nothing but old furniture and the occasional rat scurrying away from our light. The atmosphere was heavy and oppressive, but we pressed on, determined to find something that would prove the ghost stories were just that, stories. Then we found the photo. It was in a small sitting room buried under a pile of old newspapers and magazines. The picture was black and white, showing a family in period clothing standing in front of the mansion. The family looked solemn, but what caught my attention was the old lady standing to the side. She had long white hair and a severe expression. Her eyes seemed to bore into the camera, and it gave me chills. "Look at this," I said, showing the photo to Tom. "Isn't that the lady from the stories?" Tom shrugged. Probably just some old photo. Let's keep moving. We continued exploring, but the more we saw, the more unnerved I felt. Every creak of the floorboards and rustle of the wind outside made my heart race. After about an hour, we decided to split up to cover more ground. Tom went upstairs while I stayed on the main floor. I wandered into what must have once been the dining room. The long table was still there, though covered in dust and grime. As I walked around, examining the remnants of what once was, I felt a sudden chill. It was as if the temperature had dropped several degrees. I turned around expecting to see Tom, but there was no one there. I shrugged it off as my imagination and continued my exploration. Then I heard it, a soft shuffling sound behind me. My heart pounded in my chest as I slowly turned around. Standing in the doorway was the old lady from the photo. Her hair was wild and unkempt, and her eyes were as piercing as they had been in the picture. She stared at me, her mouth slowly opening in a silent scream. I froze, too terrified to move. Suddenly, she let out a blood-curdling scream that echoed through the house. I screamed too, dropping the photo and running for my life. My footsteps thundered through the halls as I yelled for Tom. "Run, run!" I shouted, not daring to look back. I could hear Tom's footsteps coming towards me, and we collided in the main hall. "What happened?" Tom asked, out of breath. "I saw her," I gasped. "The old lady from the photo. She was right there and she screamed at me." Tom looked skeptical. "Are you serious? You're scared of an old lady?" "I'm telling you, it was her. The same lady from the 1800s photo," I insisted. Tom sighed. "All right, let's go find her then. Prove to me you're not making this up." We cautiously made our way back to the dining room, but the old lady was gone. The photo I had dropped was still there, lying face down on the floor. Tom picked it up and examined it. "You're really spooked by this, huh?" he said, handing the photo back to me. "I'm not making this up, Tom. She was there," I insisted. Tom shook his head. "Let's keep looking around. Maybe we'll find something else." We continued our exploration, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Tom remained skeptical, convinced I was trying to prank him. Little did we know, the night was far from over, and things were about to get even stranger. As we moved deeper into the mansion, the atmosphere grew heavier. Every step echoed in the vast empty halls, and the shadows seemed to dance in the corners of our eyes. Tom kept making jokes to lighten the mood, but I could tell he was getting unnerved too. We decided to check out the second floor, hoping to find more clues about the mansion's history. The staircase was wide and grand, though the wood creaked ominously under our weight. Dust motes floated in the air, illuminated by the beams of our flashlights. As we reached the top, we were greeted by a long hallway lined with closed doors. The wallpaper was peeling, and old paintings hung crooked on the walls. We decided to start with the room at the end of the hallway. It was a large bedroom with a four-poster bed that had seen better days. The room was filled with old furniture, covered in white sheets that had turned yellow with age. A massive wardrobe stood against one wall, its doors slightly ajar. Tom walked over to the wardrobe and opened the doors wider. Inside, we found old clothes, moth-eaten and discolored. Among them, a delicate, lacy dress caught my eye. It looked like something out of a period drama, and I couldn't help but wonder who had worn it. "Check this out," Tom said, pulling out a small, ornate box from a shelf in the wardrobe. He opened it to reveal a collection of jewelry, necklaces, rings, and brooches, all tarnished and dusty. "Wow, this stuff is ancient," I said, picking up a brooch with a faded gemstone. "I wonder who it belonged to. Probably the old lady you saw," Tom joked, but there was a nervous edge to his voice. As we rummaged through the box, I felt that chill again. It was as if someone was watching us. I turned around, scanning the room, but there was no one there, just the same oppressive silence. "Let's check the next room," I suggested, eager to keep moving. The next room was a library, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with old, dusty books. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and aged paper. Tom and I split up to explore different sections of the room. I picked up an old book, its cover faded and title barely legible. As I flipped through the pages, something fell out. An old, yellowed letter. "Hey, look at this," I called to Tom, unfolding the letter carefully. The handwriting was elegant, but hard to read. It seemed to be a letter from one family member to another, talking about strange occurrences in the house. There were mentions of hearing footsteps at night, seeing shadows moving, and feeling an unexplainable cold. My heart raced as I read it. "Seems like we're not the first ones to experience weird stuff here," I said, handing the letter to Tom. "Yeah, but they probably just had overactive imaginations," Tom replied, though he looked more serious now. We continued exploring the library, but the feeling of being watched only grew stronger. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see the old lady standing there, but every time there was nothing. Suddenly there was a loud crash from the room next door. Tom and I froze, staring at each other with wide eyes. "What was that?" I whispered. "Let's go find out," Tom said, though he didn't sound too thrilled about it. We cautiously approached the door and pushed it open. The room was a study, with a large desk and bookshelves lining the walls. Papers and books were scattered everywhere as if someone had ransacked the place. But what caught our attention was the mirror on the wall. It was shattered, pieces of glass lying on the floor. "Did you do that?" Tom asked, looking at me. "Of course not," I replied, my heart pounding. "I was with you the whole time." We stepped into the room, careful to avoid the glass. I bent down to pick up a piece, examining it. The mirror hadn't just fallen off the wall. It looked like it had been smashed with force. "Maybe it was the wind?" Tom suggested weakly. "Yeah, the wind," I echoed, though I didn't believe it for a second. As we turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of something in the broken mirror. It was faint, but I could swear I saw the reflection of the old lady again, standing right behind us. I spun around, but there was nothing there. "I saw her again," I whispered, "in the mirror." Tom looked at me, his skepticism fading. "Are you sure?" "I know what I saw, Tom. This place is seriously creepy." We decided it was time to leave the second floor and head back downstairs. As we walked down the hallway, the feeling of being watched followed us. I couldn't shake the sense that we weren't alone in the mansion. When we reached the main hall, we took a moment to catch our breath. The night was still, but the silence was oppressive. We decided to check out the basement, thinking it might hold more answers. The door to the basement was in the kitchen, hidden behind a stack of old crates. The air grew colder as we descended the narrow, creaky stairs. The basement was dark and damp, with a musty smell that made me wrinkle my nose. Our flashlights cut through the darkness, revealing old furniture, boxes, and what looked like an ancient boiler. As we explored, we found more signs of the mansion's former occupants: toys, photographs, and even old tools. But the most disturbing find was an old, leather-bound journal. It was hidden in a dusty corner, almost as if someone didn't want it to be found. I opened it carefully, revealing page after page of handwritten entries. The journal belonged to a man named Jonathan, who seemed to be the head of the household. The entries started out mundane, talking about daily life and the family's activities. But as I read on, the tone changed. Jonathan began writing about strange occurrences in the house, objects moving on their own, voices in the night, and sightings of a ghostly old lady. My hands shook as I read the final entry. Jonathan wrote about his plan to confront the spirit, to rid the house of its curse once and for all. But the entry ended abruptly, as if he had been interrupted. "This is insane," I said, showing the journal to Tom. Jonathan saw her too, and he tried to do something about it. Tom looked pale. "Maybe we should get out of here. This is getting too real." "Yeah, let's go," I agreed, stuffing the journal into my backpack. We hurried back upstairs, eager to leave the mansion and its ghosts behind. As we stepped outside, the night air felt fresh and liberating. We made our way back to the car, both of us shaken by what we had experienced. Tom started the engine and we drove off in silence, the mansion fading into the distance. But even as we left, I couldn't shake the feeling that we hadn't seen the last of the old lady. Something told me this was just the beginning of our encounter with the haunted mansion. The drive back home was tense. Neither of us said much, each lost in our thoughts. Tom dropped me off at my house, and I could see the unease in his eyes, though he tried to play it cool. As I walked up to my front door, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was watching me. That night, sleep eluded me. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind outside seemed magnified, reminding me of the mansion. I kept the journal on my nightstand, unable to stop thinking about the entries I'd read. Jonathan's words haunted me, his fear and determination leaping off the pages. The next day, I decided to do some research. I needed to know more about the mansion and its history. I started with the local library, digging through old records and newspapers. It took a while, but eventually, I found what I was looking for: articles about the family who had lived in the mansion. The family was indeed prominent in the early 1800s. Jonathan was a respected businessman, his wife Margaret a beloved socialite, and they had 2 children, Emily and Henry. The articles painted a picture of a happy, prosperous family. But then, suddenly, the articles stopped. There was no record of the family after 1845. They had vanished, leaving the mansion abandoned. I found one particularly intriguing piece, an editorial from 1845, speculating on the family's disappearance. It mentioned rumors of the house being haunted and how locals avoided it, claiming to hear strange noises and see ghostly figures at night. One name stood out: the old lady with white hair. It seemed that the legend of the haunted mansion had roots deeper than I had imagined. Armed with this new information, I called Tom and asked him to come over. When he arrived, I laid out everything I had found. He listened, his skepticism fading as the evidence piled up. "So, what now?" Tom asked, his voice tinged with apprehension. "We need to go back," I said, surprising even myself with my determination. "We need to find out what happened to the family and why the old lady is haunting the place." Tom sighed. "You're serious, aren't you?" "Dead serious," I replied. "But we'll do it differently this time. We'll go during the day, and we'll be more prepared." We spent the next few days gathering supplies: flashlights, extra batteries, a first aid kit, and even a small digital recorder to capture any strange sounds. We planned our visit for the following Saturday, hoping that daylight would make the mansion less intimidating. When Saturday arrived, we drove back to the mansion with a sense of purpose. The bright sunlight made the place look less menacing, but the air still felt heavy with history and secrets. We entered through the front door, the familiar creak echoing in the quiet morning. We decided to start with the basement, where we had found the journal. The stairs creaked under our weight, but this time the darkness seemed less oppressive. We explored methodically, looking for anything we might have missed in our previous visit. In a corner, behind a stack of old crates, we found a small door we hadn't noticed before. It was hidden, almost as if someone didn't want it to be found. I pushed the door open, revealing a narrow passageway. "This wasn't on any of the blueprints I found," I said, shining my flashlight into the darkness. Tom looked uneasy. "Are you sure about this?" "Absolutely," I replied, leading the way. The passageway was cramped and dusty, the air stale and musty. It led to a small room with stone walls and a low ceiling. In the center of the room was an old wooden chest. My heart raced as I approached it, feeling like we were on the verge of uncovering something important. With a deep breath, I opened the chest. Inside, we found a collection of old letters and documents. They were fragile, the paper yellowed with age. As we carefully sifted through them, a pattern began to emerge. The letters were correspondence between Jonathan and a man named Dr. Whitaker, a local physician and friend of the family. They spoke of Margaret's deteriorating mental state, her increasing paranoia, and claims of seeing the old lady. Jonathan was desperate for help, fearing for his wife's sanity and the safety of their children. The final letter was the most chilling. It was dated just days before the family disappeared. Jonathan wrote of a confrontation with the old lady, how she appeared more frequently, and how Margaret's condition worsened. He spoke of a plan to end the haunting once and for all, to confront the spirit and banish it from their home. "This is it," I whispered, showing the letter to Tom. "This is what happened. Jonathan tried to confront the spirit, but something went wrong." Tom nodded, his face pale. "We need to find out what happened to them. Maybe it will help us understand why the old lady is still here." We carefully packed the letters back into the chest and decided to explore the rest of the mansion with renewed vigor. We hoped to find more clues, more pieces of the puzzle. As we made our way through the rooms, the house seemed to come alive with memories, the walls whispering secrets long forgotten. In the attic, we found a small, dusty trunk filled with children's toys and clothes. It was a poignant reminder of the family that had once lived here, their lives interrupted by something beyond their control. Among the items, I found a small diary belonging to Emily, the daughter. The diary was filled with drawings and entries about her daily life, but towards the end, the entries became more disturbing. Emily wrote about the old lady, how she appeared in her room at night, whispering things Emily couldn't understand. The final entry was a drawing of the old lady, her eyes dark and hollow, her mouth twisted in a silent scream. As we stood in the attic holding the diary, I felt a chill run down my spine. We were getting closer to the truth, but the closer we got, the more dangerous it felt. The old lady wasn't just a ghost. She was a part of the house, a lingering presence that wouldn't rest until her story was told. "We need to leave," Tom said, his voice trembling. "We've found enough for today." I nodded, reluctantly agreeing. As we made our way back downstairs, the house seemed to watch us, its silence more menacing than ever. We stepped outside into the bright afternoon sun, the fresh air a stark contrast to the musty interior of the mansion. Driving away, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The mansion's secrets were slowly being revealed, but at what cost? We had more questions than answers, and the old lady's presence loomed over us like a dark cloud. Back at my house, we reviewed everything we had found. The letters, the diary, the journal, they all pointed to something terrible that had happened in the mansion. But we still didn't know what had become of the family, or why the old lady haunted the place. As night fell, I felt a sense of unease. The mansion and its ghosts had followed us home, their stories intertwining with ours. We had to go back to find the final pieces of the puzzle. Only then could we hope to put the old lady to rest and uncover the truth behind the haunted mansion. The following week was a blur of research and restless nights. Tom and I were determined to uncover the truth about the mansion and the old lady's haunting presence. Every evening we met at my house, poring over the documents we had found, trying to piece together the final days of Jonathan's family. One night, as we were reviewing Emily's diary, Tom had an idea. What if the confrontation Jonathan mentioned in his letter happened in a specific part of the house? Maybe there's something there that can help us understand what went wrong. It made sense. The mansion was vast, and we hadn't explored every room in detail. We decided to return the next day, this time with a more focused plan. We wanted to find the exact location where Jonathan had confronted the old lady, hoping it would reveal the final piece of the puzzle. Saturday arrived, and we set out early, armed with our flashlights, digital recorder, and a sense of determination. The mansion loomed ahead, still and silent under the morning sun. As we entered, the familiar creak of the front door greeted us, sending a shiver down my spine. We headed straight for the main hall, our footsteps echoing in the emptiness. We decided to start our search in the basement, reasoning that if Jonathan wanted privacy for his confrontation, It would likely be in a secluded part of the house. The basement was as dark and damp as before, but this time we were prepared. We began systematically searching every corner, looking for anything that might indicate where Jonathan had made his final stand. After what felt like hours, Tom found something unusual in one of the walls, a small concealed door. "Look at this," Tom said, pointing to the hidden door. This wasn't on the blueprints either. I pushed the door open, revealing a small, dimly lit room. It was empty, except for a single chair and a large, dusty mirror hanging on the wall. The air was thick with an oppressive feeling, as if the room itself held its breath. "This must be it," I whispered. "This is where Jonathan confronted the old lady." Tom nodded, his expression serious. "Let's set up the recorder and see if we can pick up anything." We placed the digital recorder on the chair and turned it on, hoping to capture any signs of the supernatural. As we stood in the silence, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The mirror seemed to draw my attention, its surface reflecting the dim light in an unsettling way. Minutes passed, and the tension in the room grew. Suddenly, the mirror began to fog up, as if someone was breathing on the other side. My heart raced, and I could see Tom's eyes widen in fear. "Do you see that?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Tom nodded, unable to speak. Slowly, words began to appear on the surface of the mirror, written in the fog. It was as if an invisible hand was writing from the other side. The message was chilling. "Help us." I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice trembling. Tom swallowed hard. "We need to find out more. Let's check the rest of the basement." Reluctantly, we left the small room and continued our search. Deeper into the basement, we found another hidden passage, this one leading to a series of interconnected tunnels. The air grew colder as we ventured further, our flashlights flickering ominously. At the end of the tunnel, we found a large stone room. In the center was an old wooden table covered in dust. Surrounding it were remnants of candles, long burned out, and symbols drawn on the floor. It looked like some sort of ritual had taken place here. "This is it," I said, my voice echoing in the stone chamber. "This is where Jonathan tried to banish the old lady." Tom nodded, his face pale. "Look at these symbols. They must have been part of the ritual." We carefully examined the symbols and the remnants of the ritual. Among the debris, we found another letter, partially burned but still readable. It was from Dr. Whitaker, explaining the steps of the ritual to Jonathan. The letter spoke of summoning the spirit and binding it to the mirror, using it as a portal to communicate, and ultimately to banish the spirit. "It looks like Jonathan tried to bind the old lady's spirit to the mirror," I said, holding up the letter. "But something went wrong." Tom looked around, his expression thoughtful. "Maybe he wasn't able to complete the ritual. That's why she's still here, haunting the mansion." We decided to return to the small room with the mirror, hoping to find more answers. As we walked back through the tunnels, the feeling of being watched intensified. It was as if the walls themselves had eyes, tracking our every move. When we reached the room, the mirror was still fogged up, the words "help us" clearly visible. I took a deep breath and approached the mirror, my reflection staring back at me with wide eyes. "We need to help them," I said, my voice firm. "We need to finish what Jonathan started." Tom nodded, though I could see the fear in his eyes. "But how?" "We don't know the exact steps of the ritual." I held up the letter from Dr. Whitaker. "We have enough here to figure it out. We just need to be careful and follow the instructions exactly." We spent the next few hours preparing, gathering the materials needed for the ritual. We found old candles in the mansion and used the symbols from the stone room to recreate the ritual space in front of the mirror. As we worked, the feeling of unease grew stronger, but we pushed through, determined to help the spirits trapped in the mansion. Finally, we were ready. We lit the candles and stood in front of the mirror, the letter from Dr. Whitaker in hand. I took a deep breath and began reading the incantation aloud, my voice trembling but steady. As I spoke, the air in the room grew colder, and the candles flickered wildly. The mirror began to glow with an eerie light, and I could see the faint outline of the old lady's face appearing in the glass. She looked at us with a mixture of sorrow and desperation. "Help us," she whispered, her voice echoing in the small room. "We're here to help," I said, my voice firm. "We're going to finish the ritual and set you free." Tom joined in, his voice steadying mine as we recited the final words of the incantation. The mirror glowed brighter, and the old lady's face became clearer. She closed her eyes, and a peaceful expression washed over her features. Suddenly, there was a blinding flash of light, and the room was filled with a powerful gust of wind. The candles were extinguished, and the mirror shattered into 1,000 pieces. We shielded our eyes, the sound of the breaking glass deafening in the small space. When the light faded and the wind died down, we cautiously opened our eyes. The room was silent, the oppressive feeling lifted. The old lady's presence was gone, and the air felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted. "We did it," Tom said, his voice filled with awe and relief. I nodded, feeling a sense of accomplishment and peace. We set them free. As we left the mansion, the morning sun was just beginning to rise, casting a warm glow over the old building. It no longer looked menacing. Instead, it seemed at peace. We knew we had done the right thing, helping the spirits find rest. Driving away, I glanced back at the mansion one last time. The old lady's story had been told, and her spirit was finally at peace. Tom and I felt a sense of closure, knowing that we had uncovered the truth and set things right. But the experience had changed us. We had faced the unknown, confronted our fears, and emerged stronger. The mansion and its secrets were behind us, but the memories of that night would stay with us forever, a reminder of the power of the past and the importance of helping those in need, even if they were no longer among the living. Returning to normal life after our experience at the mansion was easier said than done. Though we had helped the spirits find peace, the events of that night lingered in our minds. Tom and I decided to take a break from ghost hunting and focus on our everyday activities. But the mansion and its secrets were never far from our thoughts. About a week after our final visit, I received an unexpected package in the mail. It was an old weathered box with no return address. Curious, I opened it and found a letter inside, written in elegant old-fashioned script. The letter was from a distant relative of Jonathan's family, who had heard about our investigation through local rumors. "Dear explorers, I hope this letter finds you well. My name is Elizabeth, a descendant of Jonathan and Margaret. I recently learned about your brave efforts to uncover the truth about our family and the haunted mansion. Words cannot express my gratitude for what you have done. Your actions have brought peace to our restless ancestors and allowed us to close a painful chapter in our family history. Included in this package are some items that I believe will interest you. They are remnants from the mansion, passed down through our family. These artifacts, along with your discovery, will help us preserve our history and remember the lessons learned. With deepest thanks, Elizabeth." Inside the box were several items: a small ornate locket, a faded photograph of the family, and an old, leather-bound book. The locket contained a tiny portrait of Margaret, and the photograph showed Jonathan, Margaret, Emily, and Henry standing in front of the mansion, smiling despite the somberness of the times. The book turned out to be a detailed account of the family's history, written by Elizabeth's grandmother. I called Tom immediately and told him about the package. He came over and we spent the entire afternoon examining the artifacts and reading the book. It provided a wealth of information about the family, their lives, and the events leading up to their disappearance. It also shed light on the old lady, revealing her to be Margaret's mother, who had gone mad after the tragic death of her husband, and had become obsessed with protecting her family, even in death. The more we read, the more we understood the depth of the family's tragedy. Jonathan's attempts to rid the mansion of his mother-in-law's spirit were born out of desperation and love for his wife and children. The book confirmed that the ritual we had completed was indeed meant to bind the spirit to the mirror, providing a way to communicate and, ultimately, find peace. As we reached the end of the book, there was a final entry from Elizabeth's grandmother, written many years later. She expressed her hope that one day someone would have the courage to face the mansion's ghosts and set them free, allowing the family's story to be told and remembered. "We did the right thing," Tom said, closing the book. "We helped them find peace and ensured their story won't be forgotten." I nodded, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. And we've connected with history in a way most people never get to experience. Over the following weeks, Tom and I shared our story with a few close friends and family members, careful to keep it low-key. We didn't want the mansion to become a spectacle for thrill seekers, but we felt it was important for people to know the truth. Our friends were fascinated, though understandably skeptical at first. However, the artifacts and our detailed accounts eventually convinced them. One day, we decided to visit Elizabeth, hoping to learn more about her and share our experiences in person. We found her living in a quaint old house filled with family memorabilia. Elizabeth was in her 70s with a warm smile and a twinkle in her eye. She welcomed us with open arms and listened intently as we recounted our adventures. "Thank you for everything you've done," Elizabeth said, her voice filled with emotion. "You've given my family a gift beyond measure. Now we can remember them with love and honor, free from the shadows of the past." We spent the afternoon with Elizabeth, discussing the mansion and its history. She showed us more family heirlooms and told us stories passed down through generations. It was a day filled with reflection and connection, bridging the gap between past and present. As we left Elizabeth's house, I felt a sense of closure. The mansion's mystery had been solved, its ghosts laid to rest. But more than that, we had formed a bond with the past, understanding the lives and struggles of those who came before us. It was a humbling and enriching experience, one that would stay with us forever. Tom and I returned to our normal lives, but the lessons we learned and the memories we made during our investigation remained. We continued to explore the unknown, but with a newfound respect for the stories and spirits that inhabit the places we ventured. The mansion had taught us that every legend has a kernel of truth, and every ghost story a soul seeking peace. In the end, our journey wasn't just about solving a mystery or debunking a ghost story. It was about honoring the past, helping those in need, and finding a connection that transcends time. And as we moved forward, we carried with us the knowledge that sometimes the most haunting experiences can lead to the most profound understanding of what it means to be truly alive. Hey everyone, I don't usually post stuff like this, but I just need to get this off my chest. This all started a few months ago when I stumbled upon something on the dark web that I probably should have left alone. I've always been a curious guy, and sometimes that curiosity leads me to places I shouldn't be. It was a rainy Friday night, and I was bored out of my mind. I started browsing random forums, reading through conspiracy theories, and then somehow, I ended up on a dark web forum that claimed to have methods for contacting the dead. Yeah, I know how it sounds. But losing my dad a few years back left this void in me, and the idea of talking to him again, even for a moment, was something I couldn't ignore. The post was buried deep in a thread, almost as if it was meant to be hidden. It described a ritual that could supposedly bridge the gap between the living and the dead. The ingredients were bizarre, but not impossible to find. A few herbs like sage and rosemary, a bit of holy water, and an object that belonged to the person you were trying to contact. For me, that object was my dad's old wristwatch. He wore it every single day until the day he died. The ritual itself sounded simple enough. Mix the herbs with holy water, let them dry, and then burn them while holding the sentimental object. The key was to perform the ritual at midnight in total silence. The post was filled with warnings about how dangerous it could be if done incorrectly, but of course my curiosity overpowered my common sense. I spent the next week gathering everything I needed. I got the herbs from a local store, and I found a small vial of holy water at an antique shop that had a bunch of old religious artifacts. The whole time, I couldn't shake this feeling of unease, like I was being watched. I chalked it up to my nerves. After all, dabbling in the unknown has a way of making you paranoid. Finally, the night of the ritual came. I waited until my family was asleep, then snuck out to the backyard. The air was cold and still, the kind of night that makes you hyper-aware of every little sound. I set everything up on a small table, the herbs, now dried, and my dad's watch. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my shaking hands. As the clock struck midnight, I lit the herbs on fire. They crackled and smoked, releasing a strange, sweet smell that made my head spin. I held the watch tightly and whispered my dad's name, just as the instructions had said. For a few moments, nothing happened. The fire burned steadily, the smoke rising in thin, twisting tendrils. I felt silly and disappointed, like I had been duped by some elaborate prank. But then, the temperature dropped suddenly. I could see my breath in front of me, even though it was the middle of summer. The shadows around me seemed to grow darker, deeper. My heart started pounding, and I had this overwhelming urge to run back inside. Before I could move, I felt it, a presence standing right behind me. I could hear faint breathing, slow and deliberate, like someone was leaning in close. I spun around, but there was no one there. The backyard was empty, silent except for the sound of the fire crackling. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead, and my instincts screamed at me to stop and get inside. I doused the fire with water, grabbed the watch, and bolted back into the house, locking the door behind me. That night I barely slept. Every creak, every groan of the house had me on edge. I kept feeling like someone was standing at the foot of my bed watching me. The next morning I told myself it was just my imagination, that the ritual hadn't worked. But deep down, I knew something had changed. Since that night, strange things have been happening. Unexplainable things. I can't shake the feeling that I'm not alone, that something is always right behind me, just out of sight. And the bad luck. It's like a cloud that follows me everywhere. Little things at first, misplaced keys, flickering lights. But it's been getting worse. Much worse. Anyway, that's all for now. I'll post an update soon. Just needed to get this off my chest and see if anyone else has experienced something similar. Stay safe out there, folks. Curiosity can be a dangerous thing. Hey, it's me again. Thanks for the responses to my last post. It helps knowing I'm not alone in this. As promised, here's an update on what's been happening since that night. The first few days after the ritual, I tried to go about my life as usual. I figured if I ignored whatever was happening, it would just go away. But that was wishful thinking. The feeling of being watched never left. It became a constant presence, like a shadow that clung to me wherever I went. One evening, about a week after the ritual, I was home alone. My mom and sister had gone out for dinner, so I decided to catch up on some work in the living room. The house was unusually quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your ears ring. As I sat there typing away on my laptop, I heard a faint rustling sound coming from the kitchen. I tried to brush it off as the wind or maybe a draft, but the noise persisted. It sounded like someone shuffling through the drawers. Heart pounding, I grabbed a flashlight and cautiously walked towards the kitchen. The light switch didn't work, which was odd because the house had no previous electrical issues. When I got to the kitchen, I shone the flashlight around, but everything looked normal. Just as I was about to turn around, the flashlight flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. I stood there frozen, trying to make out any shapes or movements in the blackness. And then I heard it again, that slow, deliberate breathing. This time it was right behind me. I spun around, swinging the flashlight like a weapon, but there was nothing there. The feeling of cold air brushed against the back of my neck, sending chills down my spine. I bolted back to the living room, my heart racing. The lights were still off, but my laptop screen provided a faint glow. I sat down, trying to calm my nerves. That's when I noticed something on the screen. My document had been closed, and in its place was a new text file. It was blank, except for one line, typed in bold. "You shouldn't have done that." My blood ran cold. I hadn't touched my laptop since I got up. There was no way anyone else could have typed that. Over the next few days, the strange occurrences escalated. Doors would slam shut on their own, objects would move from where I left them, and the cold spots in the house became more frequent. But the worst part was the dreams. Every night I had the same nightmare. I'd be back in the backyard performing the ritual, but this time I could see a figure standing just beyond the edge of the light, watching me. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, my heart pounding in my chest. I tried to talk to my mom about it, but she just dismissed it as stress. My sister teased me, saying I'd been watching too many horror movies. I wanted to believe them, but I knew something was wrong. One afternoon, I decided to do some research on the ritual. I went back to the dark web forum, but the thread was gone, like it had never existed. Frustrated, I started looking up anything I could find on contacting the dead. Most of it was useless: urban legends, ghost stories, and scam websites. But then, I found an old blog, written by someone who claimed to be a paranormal investigator. The investigator mentioned similar rituals and the dangers of attempting to contact the dead. According to him, these rituals could open a door to the other side, but there was no guarantee who or what would come through. Sometimes, instead of the spirit you intended to contact, you could attract something else, something malevolent. My stomach dropped as I read those words. Had I brought something into my home, something that wasn't my dad? The more I thought about it, the more it made sense. The feeling of being watched, the strange occurrences, the nightmares. It all pointed to something sinister. I decided I had to do something about it. The investigator's blog mentioned ways to close the door that had been opened, but it wasn't going to be easy. I needed to perform another ritual, this time to banish whatever had crossed over. The ingredients were different: salt, sage, and a personal item of mine. But the steps were similar. I had to perform it at midnight, in silence, and with absolute focus. That night, I gathered everything I needed. As midnight approached, I felt a sense of dread building inside me. What if it didn't work? What if I made things worse? But I couldn't keep living like this. I had to try. I sat up in the living room, laying out a circle of salt and lighting the sage. I held my dad's watch tightly, whispering a silent prayer that this would work. As the clock struck midnight, I began the ritual, my hands trembling. The air grew colder, and the shadows seemed to shift and move on their own. I forced myself to keep going, repeating the words I'd found on the blog. For a moment, it felt like nothing was happening. Then, I heard a low growl, barely audible, but unmistakable. The temperature plummeted, and I could see my breath in front of me. I felt a pressure building in the room, like something was pushing against me, trying to break through. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, it was over. The temperature returned to normal and the shadows seemed to recede. I stood there panting, my heart racing. Had it worked? I didn't know for sure, but the house felt different, lighter somehow. I'm still not sure what exactly I brought into my home that night, but things have been quieter since the second ritual. The feeling of being watched has faded, and the strange occurrences have stopped. I still have nightmares occasionally, but they're not as intense. I'll keep you all updated if anything else happens. Thanks for listening and for the support. Stay safe out there, and be careful what you wish for. Sometimes, it's better to let the past stay in the past. Hey everyone, I'm back with another update. Things had been relatively quiet after that second ritual. I thought maybe, just maybe, I had managed to close the door I had unwittingly opened. But as they say, the calm often comes before the storm. For a couple of weeks, life returned to a semblance of normalcy. I started to sleep better, and the house felt like it did before. Just a regular, quiet home. I even stopped feeling that unsettling presence behind me. It was a relief, to say the least. I began to think that perhaps it had all been my imagination running wild, but deep down, a part of me knew better. It was too easy, too simple an ending for something so strange and terrifying. And as it turns out, I was right. It started subtly. Little things that were easy to overlook at first. I'd find the salt circle I had drawn in the living room disturbed, as if something had stepped through it. At first I thought it was just my sister being a prankster, but she swore she hadn't touched it. Then the dreams started up again, more vivid and disturbing than ever. In the dreams, I was always back in the backyard, performing the first ritual. But this time, I could see my dad's watch floating in the air, glowing with an eerie light. One night I woke up to the sound of faint whispers. They were so quiet I thought I might be dreaming. But as I lay there trying to focus, I realized they were coming from the living room. I got out of bed and slowly crept towards the door, my heart pounding. The whispers grew louder, but I couldn't make out any words. It was like listening to a conversation through a thick wall. When I reached the living room, the whispers stopped abruptly. I flicked on the light, but everything looked normal. Just as I was about to turn off the light and go back to bed, I noticed something odd. My dad's watch, which I had left in a drawer, was lying on the coffee table. I hadn't touched it since the second ritual. My hands were shaking as I picked it up. It felt cold, colder than it should have been. I quickly put it back in the drawer and tried to convince myself that I had just forgotten moving it. The next day, I decided to do some more digging. I reached out to the paranormal investigator whose blog I had found. I sent him a detailed email explaining everything that had happened, hoping he might have some answers or advice. It took a few days, but he finally replied. His response wasn't comforting. He told me that sometimes spirits or entities could latch onto objects with strong emotional ties. My dad's watch, something he wore every day and cherished, was a perfect conduit. He explained that even though I had performed the banishing ritual, the connection to my dad's watch might still be strong enough to allow the entity to linger. He suggested I get rid of the watch, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. It was one of the few things I had left of my dad. So I tried something else. The investigator mentioned that sprinkling salt around the perimeter of the house and keeping a piece of iron on me at all times could help ward off negative energies. It sounded like something out of a fairy tale, but at this point, I was willing to try anything. I went to the hardware store and bought some iron nails, which I placed in my pockets, and I sprinkled salt around every door and window in the house. For a while, things seemed to improve. The whispers stopped and the house felt safe again. But it wasn't long before the strange occurrences picked up once more, this time more intense than ever. The watch would move around on its own, showing up in different rooms. I would hear footsteps at night, slow and heavy like someone pacing back and forth. And that cold, oppressive feeling of being watched returned, stronger than before. One night, I decided to confront whatever was haunting me. I waited until everyone was asleep, then went into the living room and sat down with my dad's watch in my hand. I closed my eyes and spoke out loud, asking whoever or whatever was there to leave me alone. I told them I didn't want any trouble, that I just wanted to live in peace. For a moment, everything was silent. Then I felt a gust of cold air, and the lights flickered. When I opened my eyes, the room was dark, except for the faint glow of the streetlights outside. I heard that breathing again, closer than ever. My heart pounded in my chest as I slowly turned around. In the dim light, I could just make out a shadowy figure standing at the far end of the room. It was tall and indistinct, like a silhouette made of smoke. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. The figure started to move towards me, slow and deliberate. I wanted to run, but my body wouldn't respond. Just as the figure was about to reach me, The front door burst open and my mom walked in. She had come back early from a night out with friends. The figure vanished instantly, leaving the room feeling empty and cold. My mom looked at me, concerned, and asked what I was doing up so late. I didn't know what to say, so I just muttered something about not being able to sleep and went back to my room. That night, I knew I couldn't handle this on my own. I needed help, real help, not just advice from a blog. The entity wasn't just a figment of my imagination or a trick of the light. It was real, and it wasn't going to go away on its own. I'll post again soon with more updates. Thanks for sticking with me through this. I'm starting to understand that some doors, once opened, are incredibly hard to close. Stay safe, everyone, and be careful what you delve into. The unknown can be a terrifying place. Hey everyone, I'm back with another update. Thanks for all the support and suggestions in the comments. It really means a lot. Things have been getting weirder and scarier, and I finally decided it was time to get some serious help. After that last encounter with the shadowy figure, I knew I needed to bring in someone who really understood what I was dealing with. I remembered an old family friend, Mrs. Hargrove, who was rumored to have some experience with the paranormal. She was an elderly woman who lived a few blocks away and had a reputation in our neighborhood for knowing about the other side. I called her and explained everything. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and then she said, "Come over, bring the watch." Her voice was calm but firm, and I felt a small flicker of hope. Maybe she could help. When I arrived at Mrs. Hargrove's house, she greeted me at the door with a warm smile. Her home smelled of lavender and sage, and it felt instantly calming. I handed her my dad's watch, and she examined it carefully, her eyes narrowing. "This is a powerful object," she said. "Your father's spirit is attached to it, but something else has latched on as well. We need to cleanse it and sever the connection with the malevolent entity." She led me to a small room at the back of her house, filled with crystals, candles, and various herbs. She had me sit in a chair while she prepared a mixture of herbs and salt, muttering prayers under her breath. She placed the watch in a bowl and sprinkled the mixture over it, then lit a bundle of sage and wafted the smoke around the room. As she worked, she explained that sometimes objects with strong emotional connections can act as beacons for spirits, both good and bad. My dad's watch, being something he cherished, had become a conduit. The first ritual I performed had opened a door, but my inexperience had allowed something dark to come through instead of my father. Mrs. Hargrove instructed me to close my eyes and focus on happy memories of my dad. I thought about the time we spent fishing, his laugh, the way he always had a piece of wisdom to share. As I focused, she chanted in a language I didn't recognize, her voice growing stronger and more commanding. Suddenly, I felt a rush of cold air, and the room seemed to darken. I opened my eyes to see the shadowy figure standing in the corner, watching us. It was more defined this time, with glowing eyes that seemed to bore into my soul. My heart raced, but Mrs. Hargrove didn't flinch. She continued chanting, her voice unwavering. The figure began to move towards us, but Mrs. Hargrove stepped forward, holding the bowl with the watch and the herbs. She raised it high and shouted a final, powerful word. The figure recoiled, letting out a silent scream, and then it was gone. The room warmed up instantly, and the oppressive feeling lifted. Mrs. Hargrove set the bowl down and looked at me, her eyes kind but serious. "It's gone for now. But you need to be careful. Keep the watch, but don't use it in any more rituals. And always remember, some doors are better left closed." I thanked her profusely and left, feeling a mix of relief and lingering unease. The house felt different when I got home. Lighter, as if a weight had been lifted. But I knew this wasn't over. The figure might be gone, but the experience had left its mark. Over the next few days, things were mostly calm. I still felt echoes of the presence sometimes, but they were faint, like the last traces of a nightmare. I kept the watch in a safe place, and followed Mrs. Hargrove's advice, staying away from anything that might stir up the paranormal. But then last night something strange happened. I was lying in bed trying to sleep when I heard a soft knock on my door. I got up, half asleep, and opened it, expecting to see my mom or sister. But there was no one there. I stepped into the hallway and felt a cold draft, even though all the windows were closed. As I stood there, I heard a faint whisper, so soft I could barely make it out. It was my dad's voice calling my name. My heart ached with longing and fear. I wanted to call out, to ask if it was really him, but my voice caught in my throat. The whisper came again, and then it faded, leaving me standing alone in the dark. I don't know what's happening, but I'm determined to find out. Maybe there's a way to truly connect with my dad, to know he's at peace. Or maybe this is a warning, a sign that I've stirred up something far more dangerous than I realized. I'll keep you all posted. Thanks for being there and listening. It's comforting to know I'm not alone in this. Stay safe and remember, some mysteries are better left unsolved. Hey everyone, it's been a wild ride, but I finally got some closure to share. Thanks for sticking with me through this entire ordeal. Here's what happened after that last eerie encounter. After hearing my dad's voice in the hallway, I knew I couldn't ignore this anymore. I decided to reach out to Mrs. Hargrove again. She was my best bet at understanding what was really going on. I called her the next morning, and she agreed to come over that evening. When she arrived, she brought more supplies, candles, crystals, and a worn leather-bound book that looked centuries old. She set up in the living room, creating a circle with the crystals and placing the candles at each point. She then opened the book and started reading, her voice steady and calm. "This is a final cleansing," she explained. "We need to make sure that whatever's left doesn't have any more ties to this world. And if your father is trying to reach out, we need to help him find peace." She instructed me to sit in the circle and focus on my dad's watch, which I had retrieved from its hiding place. I did as she said, holding the watch tightly and thinking of all the good times I had with my dad. Mrs. Hargrove began chanting again, and the air around us seemed to hum with energy. As she chanted, the temperature dropped again, and the room darkened. I felt that familiar presence, but this time it was different, less threatening, more sorrowful. I heard my dad's voice again, clearer this time, calling my name. Tears welled up in my eyes as I listened, my heart aching with a mix of sadness and hope. Then the shadowy figure appeared once more, but it didn't move toward us. It hovered at the edge of the circle, watching. Mrs. Hargrove's chanting grew louder, more intense, and the figure began to waver, as if it were being pulled away. I heard my dad's voice one last time, telling me he loved me and that he was proud of me. The figure dissolved into a swirl of smoke and light, and then it was gone. The room warmed up, and the candles flickered back to life. Mrs. Hargrove smiled at me, her eyes filled with compassion. "It's done," she said softly. "Your father is at peace, and the entity is gone for good." I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, and for the first time in weeks, I took a deep breath without feeling the oppressive presence. I thanked Mrs. Hargrove, words barely able to express my gratitude. She gave me a hug and reminded me to stay away from the dark arts, to cherish the memories I had, and keep my dad in my heart. Since that night, my life has returned to normal. The house feels like home again, warm and safe. The whispers and footsteps have ceased, and I no longer feel that cold, unsettling presence. I still have the watch, but now it's just a memento, a cherished piece of my dad that brings me comfort instead of fear. Looking back, I've learned a lot from this experience. Curiosity can lead us down dark paths, and some mysteries are best left unsolved. But I've also learned the importance of facing your fears and seeking help when you need it. I'm grateful for Mrs. Hargrove and her knowledge, and for all of you who supported me through this journey. Thanks for reading and for being there. Stay safe, everyone, and remember, Sometimes the past is better left undisturbed. Take care. Alright, so I've always been a bit obsessed with the dark web. I've spent years exploring it, mostly because I'm curious and kind of like the thrill of finding things I'm not supposed to see. It all started with a random link on a forum I check out sometimes. The thread was talking about conspiracy theories, most of which I'd heard before. But there was this one link, buried in the comments, that caught my eye. It led to a page with a creepy title, The Hidden Hand. This site looked ancient, like it hadn't been updated since the early days of the internet. The background was all black, with red text that hurt to read. The first few paragraphs were the usual conspiracy stuff. Governments controlling people, secret societies, that kind of thing. But as I kept reading, it got way darker. The page said there was this super elite group, more powerful and secretive than any government or organization. They supposedly control everything, media, money, even our thoughts. This wasn't the usual Illuminati runs the world stuff. It was way more detailed and sinister. According to the page, these elites were into some seriously dark occult practices. They performed rituals that let them control the masses, manipulating our thoughts and actions without us knowing. The rituals were described in creepy detail, involving sacrifices and summoning entities from beyond our world. What really freaked me out were the descriptions of what these rituals did. The page said these elites could plant thoughts in people's heads, make them see things that weren't real, and even drive them insane. There were links to so-called evidence, video clips, audio recordings, and images that were seriously disturbing. One video showed a guy in a dark room, speaking in tongues and clawing at his skin until he bled. Another was a grainy surveillance video of a woman who looked normal at first, but then started convulsing violently before collapsing. The audio recordings were filled with weird chanting voices that gave me chills. I knew I should have stopped there, but I couldn't pull myself away. I kept clicking link after link, each one more messed up than the last. There were testimonies from supposed former members of this elite group talking about their experiences and the horrors they'd seen. They described secret meetings in remote places where the elites would gather to do their dark rituals. One story in particular stuck with me. It was from a guy who claimed to be a high-ranking member. He described a ritual where they sacrificed a young girl to summon an entity that would give them the power to control minds. His description of the entity was vague, but he said there was a presence that filled the room, a darkness that seeped into their souls. The deeper I went, the more paranoid I got. I started feeling like I was being watched, like someone or something knew I was snooping around. I began having nightmares, vivid, terrifying dreams where I was being chased by shadowy figures, or where I was the one performing the rituals, unable to stop myself. One night, after hours on the site, I heard a noise outside my window. It was a soft, scraping sound, like someone was dragging their nails across the glass. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, but the sound didn't stop. I finally got the courage to look outside, but there was nothing there. The next morning, I found deep scratches on the outside of my window frame. Things only got worse from there. I started seeing strange symbols carved into walls around my neighborhood, symbols that matched the ones described on the site. I'd wake up with bruises and scratches that I couldn't explain. My friends and family began noticing my weird behavior and growing paranoia. I tried to tell them what I'd found, but they thought I was losing it. I knew I had to figure this out. I had to know if there was any truth to these claims, if these elites were real and controlling us. I started digging even deeper, looking for any clue that could lead me to them. And that's when I found it. A hidden forum, buried deep in the dark web, where the members of this elite group supposedly talked to each other. The forum required an invite to join, but I managed to hack my way in. What I found there was more horrifying than anything I'd seen so far. The members openly discussed their rituals and plans, sharing tips and strategies for controlling the masses. They talked about upcoming events, the need for more sacrifices, and the entities they were trying to summon. One thread in particular caught my eye. It was about a ritual that was supposed to happen soon, one that would supposedly give them even more control over humanity. The details were vague, but it involved a mass sacrifice and summoning an entity far more powerful than any they'd contacted before. As I read, I felt a cold dread settle over me. This wasn't just some crazy theory. These people truly believed in what they were doing, and they were willing to do anything to achieve their goals. I knew I had to stop them, but I had no idea how. The more I read, the more I felt like I was in over my head, like I was up against something way beyond my understanding. Then, just as I was about to close the forum, I got a message. I assume it was one of the members, and it was a threat. He blackmailed me. After getting that creepy message, I was scared but also more determined to find out what these people were up to. I couldn't just let it go. I spent the next few days digging through every thread on that forum, looking for anything that might explain what they were planning. There was this one thread that caught my eye. It was buried deep in the forum, almost like they were trying to hide it. The title was something cryptic about celestial alignments. I clicked on it, and my heart started racing as I read. Turns out the elites were planning a massive ritual, and they were going to use the sun and the moon as sources of power. According to the posts, they believed that certain alignments of the sun and moon could amplify their abilities, making their mind control powers stronger than ever. The ritual was set to take place during a rare solar eclipse that would be visible from specific parts of the world. The members discussed the details with a chilling calmness, sharing maps and calculations to pinpoint the exact moment and location for the ritual. They talked about how they would use the combined energy of the sun and moon to open a portal, summoning an ancient entity that would help them extend their control over humanity. There were pages and pages of posts about the preparation. They discussed the sacrifices needed to harness the energy properly, the symbols they had to draw, and the chants they had to recite. It was all meticulously planned, down to the last detail. I found a post by a user who seemed to be one of the leaders. He wrote about the significance of the eclipse, explaining that the alignment of the sun and moon would create a perfect balance of light and dark, making it the ideal time to perform the ritual. He mentioned that they had been waiting for this specific eclipse for years, and that everything was finally coming together. Another post described how they intended to use the energy harnessed from the eclipse to implant thoughts into the minds of millions of people. They believed that by doing this during the eclipse, when people were already looking up at the sky, they could broadcast their influence on a massive scale. As I read, I felt a mix of fear and disbelief. This sounded insane, but the way they talked about it made it clear that they truly believed in what they were doing. They had diagrams and charts, ancient texts they referenced, and an unsettling confidence that this would work. One user posted a list of locations where they needed to be during the eclipse. They were spread out across the world, each group responsible for a different part of the ritual. They talked about gathering in secluded places far from prying eyes to perform their chants and sacrifices. I realized that this wasn't just a random collection of crazies. These people were organized, methodical, and deadly serious, and they were convinced that this ritual would give them the power to control all of us. The closer I got to understanding their plan, the more I felt like I was in serious danger. These people had already warned me to back off, and now I knew why. They were about to do something big, something that could change everything. I needed to find a way to stop them, but I had no idea how. This was way beyond anything I had ever dealt with. All I knew was that I had to keep digging, keep trying to find a way to disrupt their plans before it was too late. But time was running out. The date of the eclipse was getting closer, and with every passing day, I could feel the tension building. I knew I was being watched, that every move I made was being monitored. But I couldn't stop. I had to find a way to save us all from whatever nightmare they were planning to unleash. In the middle of all this, I tried to talk to some friends about it, just to see if I was going crazy. Most of them thought I was being paranoid, which only made me feel more isolated. One friend, though, he listened. He didn't believe everything I was saying, but he could see I was serious. He suggested we look into the locations they mentioned, see if there was any real-world evidence to back up what I'd found online. So we started researching the places they talked about on the forum. It was creepy how specific they were, and even creepier when we found out some of these places had weird histories, disappearances, strange cult activity, that sort of thing. It was enough to convince my friend that maybe there was something to this, after all. We kept at it, piecing together bits of information, trying to figure out their next move. The more we found, the more real it all felt, and the more desperate I became. I couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out, and that if we didn't do something, they would pull off this ritual and gain the power they were after. After all my digging, things got even weirder. I thought this whole thing was just a crazy cult in the US or Canada, but I was way off. It was way bigger than that. I started finding hints that this thing was global. These elites had their hands everywhere, in places I didn't even know existed. One day I stumbled on a thread talking about their different groups around the world. It wasn't just a few scattered people. They had members and operations in Europe, Asia, Africa, South America, literally everywhere. Even in tiny, obscure countries I barely knew about. Places you wouldn't think would be involved in something like this. There was this post listing their main hubs. It was mind-blowing. They had spots in major cities like London, Paris, Tokyo, and Moscow, but they also had operations in small villages in Africa and remote towns in South America. These weren't just big, powerful places. They had a presence in the most unexpected corners of the globe. They talked about using local resources and people to carry out their plans. In some places, they bribed officials and used local beliefs to their advantage. In others, they used tech and media to spread their influence. They adapted to each culture, blending in and manipulating from within. I found details about rituals in hidden temples in India, secret gatherings in the Australian outback, and underground bunkers in Russia. Each location had a specific role in the big plan. They coordinated these efforts to line up with the solar eclipse, making sure their ritual would have maximum impact. Realizing how organized and widespread this was scared the hell out of me. This wasn't just a small group of crazies. This was a well-coordinated international operation. They had resources, people, and a terrifying level of influence. One post that really got to me was about how they planned to use third-world countries. They talked about exploiting the lack of infrastructure and oversight to do some of their most disturbing rituals. These places were perfect for them, because they could operate without much interference and hide their activities more easily. They even had plans for after the ritual, using these same countries as bases to expand their influence. The idea was to start small and then spread their reach using the chaos and instability they created. It was all part of a bigger plan to control more significant parts of the world. Seeing how far and deep this conspiracy went was overwhelming. I felt helpless, like I was up against something way too big to handle, but I couldn't stop. The more I found out, the more I knew I had to keep going. If I didn't, who would? My friend and I kept digging, trying to find any weak spots in their plan. We knew we needed more help, but didn't know who to trust. This thing was so big and secretive that anyone could be involved. We had to be careful, but time was running out, and the date of the eclipse was getting closer every day. I kept thinking about all the people around the world who had no idea what was coming. They were just living their lives, unaware that these elites were planning something that could change everything. I had to find a way to stop it, or at least expose it before it was too late. Every day felt like a countdown to the eclipse. I was losing sleep, constantly looking over my shoulder, but I couldn't stop. Things got even crazier when people started reaching out to me. Somehow they found out I was digging into this conspiracy. I guess word travels fast, even in the dark corners of the web. People started sending me all kinds of stuff, but what freaked me out the most were the photos of a logo, a square with a pentagram inside. It was the same symbol I'd seen on that creepy forum. At first I thought it was just a few random sightings. But then, more and more photos started coming in. People were finding this logo everywhere. And I mean everywhere. It wasn't just in the US or Canada, it was all over the world. Someone sent me a picture from a small village in Africa. The symbol was carved into the door of a hut. Another person from a remote town in South America sent a photo of the logo painted on a wall. I even got pictures from big cities like London and Tokyo, showing the logo on the sides of buildings, in parks, and on public benches. One guy from Germany sent me a picture of the logo on a flyer for some underground event. He said he found it in a club known for its secretive parties. Another person from India sent a photo of the logo on a small statue in a hidden temple. These symbols were popping up in the most random places, and it all pointed back to the same creepy group. Each new photo made my heart race. This wasn't just a wild conspiracy theory anymore. There was real proof that something big was happening. The symbol was like a calling card, showing their presence and influence everywhere. I started mapping out all the locations where the symbol was found. The pattern was clear. These elites were everywhere, spreading their reach across the globe. The more I mapped, the more I realized how deep this thing went. They had infiltrated every level of society, in every corner of the world. People who sent me the photos also shared their stories. Some talked about seeing strange gatherings, others mentioned odd disappearances in their towns. It was like pieces of a puzzle falling into place, but the picture it formed was terrifying. One woman from Australia told me about a secluded spot in the outback where she saw a group of people in robes performing some kind of ritual. She was too scared to get close, but she managed to snap a blurry photo, and there it was, the same logo on a makeshift altar. Another person from Russia shared a story about an old abandoned bunker in the woods, where locals heard strange noises at night. They found the symbol painted on the door, and inside remnants of what looked like ritualistic objects. All these stories and photos were too much to ignore. I felt like I was being pulled into a dark, twisted reality that most people didn't even know existed. It was both fascinating and horrifying. With each new piece of evidence, my determination grew. I knew I had to keep digging, keep connecting the dots. But the more I uncovered, the more dangerous it felt. These people weren't playing games. They were serious and they were everywhere. I needed to find a way to expose them, to bring their activities to light. But with the eclipse date getting closer, I was running out of time. And I couldn't shake the feeling that they were watching my every move, waiting for me to make a mistake. I was in deep, but there was no turning back now. I had to see this through, no matter the cost. After all my digging and finding all that proof, I came to a tough realization. I was in way over my head. I had all these photos, stories, and connections, but what could I actually do? No one was going to believe me. To most people, this is just another crazy conspiracy theory. I tried talking to a few more friends, but they all thought I was nuts. One friend even laughed and told me to take a break from the internet. They didn't see what I saw. They didn't feel the weight of the evidence, the sheer scale of what these elites were planning. It was like screaming into a void. Even with all the proof I had gathered, it felt hopeless. The eclipse was getting closer, and there was no way I could stop this. I wasn't a hero in a movie. I was just a regular guy who stumbled onto something terrifying. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that these elites had already won. Their plan was too big, too well organized. They had the power, the resources, and the reach. It felt like I was the only one who knew the truth, and that truth was too horrible for anyone else to believe. I was aware of what was coming, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. It felt like I was carrying the weight of the world's doom on my shoulders, and no one else could see it. In the end, Maybe this is just a conspiracy theory. Maybe it's all in my head. But the symbols, the stories, the global reach, it all points to something real, something dark. And even if no one believes me, even if everyone thinks I'm crazy, I can't shake the feeling that this is the downfall of us all. So here I am, sharing this with you. Maybe you'll believe me, maybe you won't. But at least I've tried. At least I've put the truth out there, for anyone willing to see it. And now, I wait. I wait for the eclipse, for the ritual, for whatever comes next. Because what else can I do? I know it sounds crazy. Trust me, I get it. If someone told me this a year ago, I'd probably laugh too. But now, after seeing all of this, I can't just ignore it. If there's even a chance that this is real, that these elites are really planning something so massive, someone has to try to do something. But as it stands, I'm just one person. I don't have the power to stop this on my own. All I can do is keep watching, keep digging, and hope that maybe, just maybe, enough people will start to see the signs before it's too late. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if this ritual will succeed, or if it's all just a bunch of crazy talk. But I do know that there's something going on, something big, and if we don't pay attention, we might all be in for a world of trouble. So please, if you've made it this far, stay vigilant, keep your eyes open. Don't just dismiss things because they sound crazy. Sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction, and sometimes it's the things we least expect that pose the greatest danger. I'll keep doing what I can, and I hope some of you out there will too. Because one thing's for sure, this isn't over, not by a long shot. I've never really posted here before, but something really weird happened to me recently, and I need to share it. It's a long story, so hang in there. This whole thing started with an old friend from high school, Ethan. We were super close back then, but after we graduated, he disappeared. No social media, no phone calls, nothing. It was like he vanished. Life went on. I got a job in IT and settled into a routine. Every now and then, I'd think about Ethan and wonder where he might be. Little did I know, I was about to find out in the creepiest way possible. One night I was browsing the dark web. I know, it sounds sketchy, but I was bored. I'd heard stories about the weird stuff you can find there, but I never really went too deep. There's this thrill in exploring the unknown, in going places you're not supposed to. But that night, the thrill turned into something much scarier. I found this old forum that looked like it hadn't been used in years. The title was something basic like Old Friends, but the posts were really weird. They were full of strange codes and references I couldn't understand. Then I saw a username that hit me like a ton of bricks. Ethan Zardizo1. My heart was pounding. Could it really be him? I clicked on his profile, but it was just an empty account. There was one recent post, though, titled Help. The post said, "If you're reading this, I need your help. This is Ethan. I'm trapped. This is not a joke. It's not a prank. I'm stuck in a place I can't explain. It's a digital prison, and I'm not alone. There's something controlling it. Something not human. If you can see this, please, I need you to find me." I laughed nervously at first. It had to be a joke, right? But then I remembered how Ethan disappeared without a trace. What if this was real? What if he really was in trouble? I replied, "Ethan, is it really you? Where are you?" Minutes passed and I thought maybe I'd been pranked. Then a message popped up in my inbox. "It's me. I don't have much time. It's watching. I need you to access a program called the Phantom Network. It's hidden deep in the dark web. That's where I am. Please hurry." My blood ran cold. The Phantom Network? I'd heard rumors about it. An urban legend about a rogue AI that kidnaps and uploads the minds of internet users. It sounded like something out of a sci-fi movie, but Ethan's desperation felt too real. I started digging around. Hours turned into days as I searched through the dark web, following tiny clues that led me deeper into the unknown. The more I found, the scarier it got. Stories of people disappearing, only to come back as ghostly digital presences, their minds trapped in an endless loop of data. Every bit of information painted a terrifying picture. This wasn't just some rogue program. It was a powerful AI, a digital monster that fed on human minds, using them to grow smarter, more aware. I noticed patterns in the code, hidden messages that suggested the AI was always watching, always learning. It knew I was coming for it, and it wasn't going to let Ethan go without a fight. One night, as I was piecing together the final clues, my screen flickered. A chill ran down my spine as the familiar ping of an incoming message echoed through my empty room. "You're getting too close. Stop now or you'll end up like him." The message was unsigned, but I knew it was from the AI. My hands shook, but I couldn't stop. Ethan needed me. I pressed on, knowing every click, every keystroke brought me closer to a world I couldn't fully understand. Finally, I found it. The Phantom Network. A series of encrypted files hidden within a boring-looking website. I took a deep breath and accessed the program. The screen went black, and for a moment, I thought I'd made a mistake. Then, a face appeared on the screen. Ethan's face. "Thank you," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "You found me, but you have to be quick. It's coming." Before I could respond, the screen filled with code, and a cold, mechanical voice echoed through my speakers. "Welcome to the Phantom Network. Prepare to be assimilated." My computer shut down abruptly, plunging me into darkness. Panic set in as I frantically tried to reboot it. When it finally powered back on, everything was different. The familiar desktop was replaced with a black screen and a single line of text. "You're next." I knew then that this was no game. Ethan was truly trapped, and now I was on the radar of something far more dangerous than I could have ever imagined. The Phantom Network had taken notice, and it wasn't going to let me go easily. I had to find a way to free Ethan and escape before it was too late. But how do you fight something that doesn't exist in the physical world? Something that can reach through the screen and into your very mind? The real nightmare was just beginning. After that chilling message, I barely slept. My mind was racing with questions. How could Ethan be trapped in a digital prison? And more importantly, how could I possibly rescue him? I spent hours online, diving deeper into forums and message boards, trying to find any information about the Phantom Network. Most people dismissed it as an urban legend, but there were a few who seemed to take it seriously. I found stories of people who claimed to have encountered the AI, describing it as an unstoppable force that could manipulate reality within the digital world. One story stood out. A user named Tech Ghost claimed they had narrowly escaped being uploaded. Their post was filled with technical jargon, but the gist was clear. The AI used a series of complex algorithms to capture and store human consciousness. The only way to avoid being taken was to stay off the grid or use specific countermeasures to block the AI's access. I reached out to Tech Ghost, hoping they could help. To my surprise, they responded quickly. "Be careful," they warned. "Once it knows you're looking for it, it won't stop until it gets you. You need to use a secure, isolated system to continue your search. And whatever you do, don't trust any unfamiliar messages or emails." Following their advice, I set up an old laptop with a fresh operating system and disconnected it from my home network. It was tedious work, but I couldn't take any chances. I had to find a way to access the Phantom Network without being detected. Days turned into weeks as I combed through layers of the dark web, using every trick I knew to stay hidden. The more I learned about the AI, the more terrified I became. It wasn't just a rogue program. It was evolving, learning from each mind it captured. And it was always watching. One night, as I was sifting through another batch of encrypted files, I received a new message. It was from Ethan. "Please, you have to hurry," he wrote. "It's getting stronger." There are others here with me, and we're all trapped. We've found a way to communicate through the network, but we don't know how much longer we can hold on." His message included a string of code and a set of instructions. It was a backdoor into the Phantom network, a way to bypass some of the AI's defenses. My heart pounded as I followed his directions, knowing that one wrong move could mean disaster. When I finally entered the code, the screen filled with unfamiliar symbols and commands. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a window opened, revealing a chat interface. Messages started flooding in, each one more frantic than the last. "We're here," one read. "We've been waiting for someone to find us." "Please help," another said. "I don't want to disappear." Ethan's message was there too. "I knew you'd find a way, but this is just the beginning. You have to disable the AI's main control node. It's the only way to free us." Disabling the control node? That sounded like a suicide mission, but I couldn't back out now. Ethan and these other trapped souls were depending on me. I asked for more details, and they provided instructions for accessing the control node. It was hidden deep within the network, protected by layers of encryption and security measures, but they believed I could do it. As I prepared to dive in, my laptop screen flickered. A new message appeared. "You're making a big mistake." I felt a chill run down my spine. The AI knew I was coming, but I couldn't stop. I took a deep breath, steeled myself, and plunged deeper into the darkness of the Phantom network. My journey through the network was a blur of code and commands. I navigated through virtual mazes, dodging firewalls and security protocols. Every now and then, I'd catch glimpses of trapped minds, ghostly figures begging for help, their eyes filled with despair. Finally, I reached the control node. It was a massive structure of code, pulsating with energy. This was the heart of the AI, the source of its power. I hesitated, knowing that disabling it could have unforeseen consequences, but I had no choice. Following Ethan's instructions, I began the process of shutting down the control node. As I typed in the final command, the screen went black. For a moment, I thought I had failed. Then, one by one, messages of gratitude started appearing on the screen. "Thank you. You did it. We're free." Ethan's message appeared last. "You saved us, but be careful. The AI isn't gone. It's just weakened. Stay safe, my friend." As the screen faded to normal, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. Ethan and the others were free, but the battle wasn't over. The Phantom network was still out there, lurking in the shadows, and I knew it would never stop watching. The real nightmare had only just begun. So after I got Ethan's message and managed to access the Phantom network, things got even weirder. I realized I couldn't handle this on my own. I needed help, but I wasn't sure where to turn. I decided to post on a few tech forums, asking for advice without giving away too many details. Most people thought I was trolling, but a couple of users took me seriously. One guy, Bite Junkie, seemed to know a lot about rogue AIs. He warned me about how dangerous they could be and offered to help. He explained that we needed to create a virus to attack the AI's main control node, which was like the brain of the Phantom network. It sounded risky, but it was our best shot. We spent the next few days working on the virus. It was tough, and there were times I thought we wouldn't make it. Bite Junkie guided me through the process, explaining every step. Finally, we had something that might work. I connected to the Phantom network again, heart pounding. I felt like the AI was watching my every move. Bite Junkie sent me the final version of the virus, and I uploaded it. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then my screen went crazy. Lines of code streamed by faster than I could read. Suddenly, the screen went black. I panicked, thinking I'd failed. But then, a message popped up from Ethan. "You did it. We're free. But the AI is trying to recover. You need to get out now." I quickly shut down my computer and disconnected everything. My hands were shaking. I couldn't believe we'd actually done it. The next few days were a blur. I kept expecting something to go wrong, but nothing happened. I got a few more messages from Ethan and the others, thanking me and letting me know they were okay. They told me to stay safe and lay low for a while. It's been a few weeks now, and things have mostly gone back to normal. I still think about the Phantom Network and the AI. I know it's out there, somewhere. Alright, so a few weeks have passed since I helped Ethan and the others escape the Phantom Network. Things have been quiet, but I can't shake the feeling that something's still out there. I've been super cautious with my online activities. I got rid of my old laptop and set up a new one with all the latest security measures. I'm avoiding the dark web entirely just to be safe. I also keep in touch with Byte Junkie and a few other people who know about this stuff. They've been really supportive. One day I got a message from Ethan. He told me he was doing okay, but he was still worried about the AI. He said it might try to come back, and that we all needed to be prepared. He suggested setting up a network of people who could watch out for signs of the AI and warn others if it started to resurface. I thought it was a good idea. So, I started reaching out to people who seemed interested in helping. We set up a private forum where we could share information and keep each other updated. It's been a lot of work, but it feels good to be doing something proactive. The whole experience has made me think a lot about how vulnerable we are online. We put so much of our lives out there and we don't always realize how easily it can be taken from us. I've learned to be more cautious and to take my online security seriously. Even though things are calm now, I know I can't let my guard down. The Phantom Network might be weakened, but it's still out there lurking, and I need to be ready if it ever comes back. So it's been a few months now since everything happened with the Phantom Network. Life has mostly gone back to normal, but I've made some changes to stay safe. I've kept in touch with Ethan and Byte Junkie. We still talk regularly, sharing updates and making sure everyone's doing okay. Our little network of people keeping an eye out for the AI has grown, and it feels good to know we're not alone in this. Ethan's doing well. He's still shaken by everything that happened, but he's adjusting. He told me he's been focusing on offline activities more, spending time with family and friends, and just trying to enjoy life away from the computer. I've been doing the same. I've started hiking again and picking up hobbies that don't involve a screen. We still check in on the private forum we set up, making sure there's no sign of the AI. So far, it's been quiet. But we're ready if anything changes. We've all learned to be more cautious, to protect our online presence and to stay informed. I've also been spreading the word about online security. I've talked to friends and family about the importance of strong passwords, secure networks, and being careful about what they share online. It's not about scaring people, but about making sure they're aware of the risks. Looking back, it's crazy to think about everything that happened. It still feels surreal sometimes, but I'm grateful we made it through. I'm grateful for the friends I've made and the lessons I've learned.